Good afternoon. We have arrived at the latest destination. Still technically in San Salvador for today, but I'm about an hour outside the city or so. I am here at the archaeological park Joya de Ceren, which you can see the sign for here. And we will go into a little bit more why I spent an hour on a bus to get out here. But it is a very important site historically. If you want to see some ruins in the area, this is definitely one of the places. Definitely one of the places you'll want to stop here in El Salvador. Let's head across and get inside. So I decided to mix it up a little bit this time and actually come to the museum first. Usually I go right to the ruins and then run out of time for the museum, but this place is kind of important in the grand scheme of the history of the Maya and all that sort of stuff. You know, as I continue to travel down through Latin America, we're getting close to the end of the Mayan Empire, but this place was kind of special. So here's a map of the classic period of the Mayan Empire, and it kind of gives you an idea of the size and scope and where we are now. And so you can see obviously up here we start with Mexico. You've got Teotihuacan, which is near Mexico City. Then we've come down through here, Monte Alban, Palenque, Tikal. And then you get down, obviously Tikal is here. And then you come down through Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, and this is where we are here today, Joya de Ceren. So Joya is famous for a very good reason. It was a village that was buried by a volcanic eruption about 1,400 years ago and was left virtually completely intact. So one of the initial comparisons for this place is Pompeii in Italy, and it's a very similar story where there was a city that was buried by a volcanic eruption under ash and was left virtually intact for thousands, 1,400 years in this case. And so in 1976, they first discovered some of the ruins here at Joya. And since then, it's been under constant work up until the mid 2010s or so. There was still archaeological work going on. There's still more to be done on top of that. But here's a kind of a good map of the history. So in 1976, they started with one of the first ruins that were uncovered, which we'll see here in a little bit. And then the initial mapping of the site was done in 1978 and 79. And then on through time, as you can see, more and more sites were uncovered and excavated. As a result of that, they have found all kinds of pottery, things like fragments, complete bowls with some really lovely paint designs on the side of them. And we're going to take a little walk just briefly through here to kind of give you an idea of what to see, and then we're going to head up and actually see it itself. This is an example of what they call a volcanic bomb. So this is material that would have been ejected from the Loma volcanic eruption. It's the kind of stuff that would have been landing on the town at the time. For size reference, I would say it's probably 40 by 40 by 40 centimeters, which would do quite a bit of damage, I would say. Here's a column. You can see some of the original paint still remains on it today. And this is kind of a map of the general area. So obviously here's Volcan San Salvador. It gives you an example of the number of towns and villages that have been affected by eruptions between 650 and the early 1900s. So there's distinct layers here. As you can see, this one example here kind of shows you the map. This is sort of where the town would have been at this level, and then there was the volcano, and then of course there was just natural dirt that has landed on top of that. And here's a picture here of the actual area in 1990. So obviously not a lot of excavation had been done yet at this point, but it gives you an idea of, what it looked like at the time. This is a little scale model of what the village likely looked like before the eruption buried it. And this is what we're going to go up and see here in a few minutes. This was an example of how the buildings were built. So you'd have mud, and then you'd have like a wooden frame, and then you'd have mud pack on both sides of it to kind of create that wall, which would have had a nice cooling effect too. During the heat, that clay would do a good job at keeping a lot of the heat out. There's a couple more examples of some pottery that they have found. The humidor, and a really beautiful plate with some nice art on it. In 1993, the United Nations and UNESCO declared this as a World Heritage Site. It is the only one in all of El Salvador and was recognized for the importance of the ruins and how intact they were from the volcanic eruption and all that sort of stuff. A very important site, as I mentioned earlier, definitely to be considered amongst one of the more impressive ruins in the world. And this document shows that. So that was just a brief tour of the museum. I'm actually the only one in here at the moment. I don't know why I'm whispering, but nonetheless. Let's actually head over to the ruins now and have a look around. So what's kind of cool about this place is that everything is kind of covered over as they're continuing to work on it. Obviously, they don't want the weather to do any further damage. So they've got these nice, really cool buildings sort of established on top of what was originally there. So just a bit of information here. It says, Joya de Ceren represents a pre-Hispanic settlement with an exceptional and unique character, given the degree of preservation of the pre-Hispanic structures, which have allowed their interpretation based on multidisciplinary scientific studies on everyday life, such as earth and architecture, the use of artifacts, environment, and context of a community of Mayan artisans and farmers from the classical period. We invite you to walk through the interpretive trails as an exceptional and unique site of the Mayan culture, preserved by 14 layers of volcanic ash, which deserved international recognition when it was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1993. Again, here's another sort of model of what we're about to head up and look at. One thing I will recommend if you're walking around parks like this is to watch out for falling mangoes. Look at these trees. These are all mango trees, and the fruit will just randomly fall off of them and sometimes bonk you in the head. Hasn't hit me yet, but I've heard of others having that kind of problem. So holy smokes. They weren't kidding when they said it was well preserved. So this first building here in front of me was a communal building, and meetings would occur here, and they determined this, they said, because in this front room where you can see these two sort of raised bench areas, these were used for people of authority to sit. So people would come in, meet with them here, and those were the kinds of things that would happen. There wasn't much here found for antiquities, which makes sense given that it was, a meeting place where people would be coming and going quite a lot. You really get a sense here on this wall. I want to zoom in a little bit of the different layers of ash. We'll get a closer look at them on the other side too, of course, but you can just get a sense of just how buried this place was. More impressive that they even managed to find it, given how far underground it was. There again, you can see the layers of ash that have been excavated to uncover this building down below here. And we'll go over and have a look at the sign and see what the details say about it. So this was a house for a family of farmers in this Mayan village. The house was built of that, I showed inside there the sticks with the mud on both sides. The wattle and daub is how they call it. And it was used as a storage place on top of that, often to help process things like agave and, fiber and those types of things. They found tools and vessels inside, along with skeletons of mice. If you think of like a barn or, those types of things, that's where the mice always are, where the food is. So these are two models. So this one here is obviously the house that's down there, to give you an idea of its structure with the internal doorway from one room to the other. And this was the first building we saw, which had the raised benches for the authority figures. One thing that's kind of amazing is that for a UNESCO World Heritage Site, there's like 5 people here. It's unbelievable. This is the second section now, which has a number of buildings inside of it. I mean, to look at this, it's awfully impressive that was done almost, 1,500, 1,600 years ago, and then buried under this ash for the last 1,400 of it. And again, as I was saying, you have the place virtually to yourself. So the first of these buildings is what's known as a temazco, or temazcal, which was basically a purification space that people would use. It was actually entirely built out of earthen architecture, and it had a really cool domed roof, which was, pretty rare for the time. This was built again pre-Hispanic, so this would have been 1,600 years ago. So here's a picture of it here. It would have had this domed roof that we saw, which looked like this, and then it would have had a thatched roof over top of that. Very similar to like a steam room, which you would see today, where they would use, heated rocks to warm the room up, create some steam and help purify the body. So as you can see here, there's the steam room here first. These other two structures, well, the one in the middle and then the one on the far side were actually housing units. One was a storage room, one was a bedroom. So this would have been like basically like a whole family's structure or area. And they actually found woven mats in that storage room that had been buried for 1400 years. So I'll just come around to the side here to give you another angle of it. So again, so the steam room here on the left, you can actually see the front door on the right-hand side of the building. And then you would have had the, other structures here, the bedroom, the storage room, and that sort of thing. In the bedroom, they actually found some pottery that would have been used for serving food to the family. And it actually notes here on this sign that's in front of me that one of the vessels that are here, which I believe are over in the museum or similar to them, one of them still had the fingerprints on the pottery from when it was, used by somebody. And again, to look at, where I'm standing and sort of over here, this is ground level now, give you an idea just how far down these structures were buried underneath all this volcanic ash and debris and everything else. So as we're walking over to the next area, it's worth noting that, this is the same vegetation that would have been around at the time when this village was here. And, the soil that was here is very rich. So it's very good for growing crops and fruit. And as we saw, mango trees, for example, those types of things. And it's like walking back in time a little bit here. Here's an example here of some of the foods that would have been grown that would have been, standard crops. It mentions here that, obviously there's a sample of like corn and beans and squash and stuff. It says there are more than 250 species of plants, medicinal, food, and ornamental plants that were found in the area. Here's some more mini models of what we're going to see next. This actually was a round circular kitchen. So this was another domestic complex. So it had the kitchen area here, it had a storage area, and then it also had like a bedroom here. And those three buildings are believed to have been owned by an artisanal family. So first here on the ground, you can actually see what looks like lines on the ground, and these were crop furrows. So they were actually growing crops here at this level on their property. And their property consisted of those three buildings that I mentioned there before. So right down here, there is the circular kitchen. And you can see there's probably like a stove element type setup there where they were cooking food in there. This would have been probably the storage room based on the models that they had. It mentioned in the storage area, and we actually saw this over in the museum. We actually saw that skeleton of a duck. Well, he was found in this storage room. He was tied to a rod with a rope and probably believed to be like a domesticated animal for the family. This is the only kitchen that they have found so far, this building here, this rounded building. And they found, ceramic pots for cooking and those types of things inside of it. They actually also found like a mortar and pestle, essentially, for, grinding grains and those types of things in there. Again, all that stuff is housed over at the museum where we initially started. And then finally, this would have been the sleeping area. So again, you can see a raised bed area as I walk by a little bit closer. This would have been, so here's the bedroom. Raised bed was there. There would have been a doorway here. And again, you can see, examples of what the walls would have looked like made with the sticks and then the mud on each side to enclose it. I would love, on a personal level, to be able to visit all the UNESCO World Heritage Sites around the world. Every time I find that there's one near where I am, I do try and go and check it out because I do think that they are very important, to understand our history and where we came from those types of things. And this is a really good reminder of how fast things can change. There was a whole village here of families and people and ducks, and the next day it was all gone. So it gives you some perspective on things. So the last two buildings in this section, this was the central ceremonial space, I guess if you want to call it that, where rituals and things would happen. And right next to it here, this would have been the shaman's home. And this is where he would have lived. So obviously very close together here with the temple. And there's some details here that talk about they were unique to the area. They found lots of things that would have been used in, preparation for spells and divination. And it's interesting that it mentions that spindle whorls and grinding instruments were found objects strictly for female use in Mesoamerica and other artifacts. So it almost makes you wonder if either the shaman themselves was a female, or if they were accepting gifts from females in exchange for divination requests at the temple. The ceremonial center itself, in this sort of middle section right about here, mentions that they have found corn harvest and rituals related to fertility. And they had various vases and things that were inside that would have been used for offerings as part of that process. So here's a model of the prayer house, and you can see how intricately designed it was, with a large open area out front and then this smaller secured area in the back with sort of the half wall blocking the passageway, which you can very clearly see here if you look closely at it. Again, I'll try and zoom in a little bit. So right here you can see that sort of half wall coming up, blocking the entranceway into the backside of the building. And then over here, where you had the shaman's house, again, you can see the entranceway here with the wall in front, and then several rooms, including a back room there. Very cool spot to come and check out these buildings. It's not a big space. You don't need a lot of time, like an hour is probably enough to come and check out both the museum and the ruins. But it's a really cool kind of thing to see, and something that's, I would argue, unique in this part of the world. To have this stuff been sitting here for 1,400 years the way it is today, and only recently uncovered in the grand scheme of things, is pretty cool. So interestingly enough, they have a full-scale replica model of the Temescal Sweat Lodge building. And you can see how small the entranceway is to get into it. I certainly can't fit. So, but to give you an idea, like this doorway is probably only, 50 centimeters wide and maybe 75 high. But with the magic of my long tripod, I can probably feed this in a little ways to get a look inside. There you can see the fireplace, and there's some of the seating area on both sides. So that's pretty much the tour. As I mentioned, there was two buildings here. The first structure we went into, and then this one over here, and then the replica. So it doesn't take you a whole lot of time to get through this place, but I would say it's definitely worth the time to get out here, check it out, and see what it's all about. So if you want to come out here yourself, the easiest way to do that from San Salvador is to get to Terminal Occidente, and from there just go to the bus platforms and look for bus number 108. It will take you right here. You don't have to get off or switch buses or anything. It took about 45 minutes to an hour, roughly. It'll depend on traffic, of course. and it was 70 cents for the bus out. And I asked the driver, and he said, yeah, the same bus goes right back into town, right past here, obviously on this side of the road as opposed to the other side. But yeah, just on the way back, just hop back on the same bus, take it back to the same terminal, get off there, and you're on your way. So I definitely recommend coming to check it out. It's not very busy. I would say I'm here on a Wednesday, and I'm like one of like 3 or 4 people that I've seen. So definitely a place to come and check out and not feel like you have to be kind of rushed to, get around the place. I guess one of the other things that's worth noting that I like about here is that so many of the big Mayan sites that you go and visit, some of the big cities with the large temples and all that sort of stuff, that's all where the rulers would have lived, where the big cities would have been, where, everything was very large and very luxurious and opulent would be the word I guess I'm looking for. But this was just a regular local village with local people living here, trying to get by like everybody else on a day-to-day basis. So it's a nice perspective change on what life during the time of the Maya would have been like. That's going to do it from here at Joya de Ceren, just outside San Salvador in El Salvador. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I was really excited to come and see another UNESCO World Heritage Site today, and I hope you enjoyed the tour. If you did, leave a like or a comment below to let me know that you were here. If you're coming across my channel for the first time, feel free to subscribe. I really appreciate everybody who does. If you'd like to support me further, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. There's a couple of donation links down below, one for PayPal and one through Bitcoin. And I also have some memberships set up through YouTube that start at just $3 per month. And remember, life is short. Wander. And I'll see you in the next video.